These increases come as no surprise to a professor of local government with the University of Technology, Joseph Drew, who's with us now. Joseph, g'day.
G'day. How are you?
Why aren't rates simply CPI adjusted?
Well, because the councils face different costs to what households cost. People forget that the CPI is based on a basket of household goods and services. Councils don't consume things like bananas and movie tickets and things like that. So if you were going to compare it to anything, you'd compare it to the producer price index, which is typically higher than the CPI.
Okay, so the peg is 0.7, but many of our councils have been able to argue for a 2.5% increase. Is that fair enough, do you reckon?
Oh, absolutely. The 0.7 peg was basically an error. It's an error because of the bad methodology we used to construct the rate peg. It's all rearward facing. Now, if any of your listeners have been to a fuel station like I went to today, you know costs have gone up astronomically of late. Looking at what happened a year ago doesn't tell us what councils need for the future 12 months. So when they did this rate peg, it was November last year, completely different inflationary environment to what we have now. That's why the IPART allowed this extra opportunity to put rates up. It's different to the SRVs. It's called an ASV, to allow councils to claw back a little bit more of the money that they should have been allocated in the peg. So, you've got the RBA now saying that inflation's going to peak at 6 or 7% this year. The peg was 0.7%. So in real terms, councils were going to get 6.3% less revenue in real terms than what they ought to have needed to keep up with costs.
There have been a lot of natural disasters, of course, which are going to make it tough for a lot of councils, despite the fact that they get emergency assistance for many of those things. Do people really understand what their councils do for them?
No, I don't think most people do, and I don't think people really understand where these costs come from. Yes, there's been natural disasters, but more importantly, there's been public policy disasters, one after another, by the state government and the federal government over many years, and we're paying the cost now. You're paying the cost if you're going to the supermarket and the fuel station as well, and we will be paying the cost for several years to come. That's just basic economic theory. That's entirely predictable. I've been predicting this since April 2020.
So what sort of things have the governments done that's impacted on councils?
Okay, so we've got a rate cap methodology that simply won't cope in a high inflation and rising inflation environment. That's not helping. We've got cost shifting. That's not helping. There was the COVID measures, which obviously didn't help anyone. And also, councils were more or less forced to take on additional costs as part of state government plans to stimulate the economy. Remember all that infrastructure they were building? They were literally throwing money at councils and telling them they had to build things. By the time the councils contracted for the work, the money they'd been given to build it wasn't going to cover the cost of building it. So councils have really been struggling because of COVID. Of course, we've got other things that are out of our control, like the war, but we've got yet other things like the transition to green energy, which involves cost, which is also putting on a lot of pressure on councils who consume a lot of electricity, consume a lot of fuel and diesel.
We know that often when employees get a wage rise, it's linked to productivity. Should our councils be better and indicate and prove that they've improved their productivity?
Of course they should, but it's a complete myth in Australia that most councils are wasteful, have lots of fat to trim. Most councils actually run extremely professionally, extremely tight. There are ones that do silly things from time to time, but I'm also aware of the federal government that spent hundreds of billions of dollars on submarines that we never got to. So you're much better off with your local government than with your higher tiers of government. They're much leaner ships. And responsible local governments will be putting up taxes. They'll be looking to put their hands up for SRVs at the end of this year for even more tax increases, because that's the responsible and prudent thing to do. And if they don't do it, what you'll actually have is more pain in the future, because the pain will get compounded. And the longer we delay, the worse the pain actually gets.
Now, Joseph, when we last spoke to you, it was around the aggregation of councils and the problems, of course, for Central Coast. Their problems, it couldn't be remedied with an approved SV. They don't even appear on the list, so I don't know what the plans for them are. But what's the status of these aggregations of councils now?
So the amalgamations continue to be a disaster. I just did another paper for the best journal in the world. It looks like it's about to get accepted. It's showing that is the direct result of the amalgamation was an increase in cost of about 11.5%. So they were a fiscal disaster. I and Professor Dollery and other people warned the state government that they would be. The question now is for the state government, do we want to bury our heads and pretend this isn't happening, that we don't have amalgamated councils going broke, that we don't have, most amalgamated councils have had double-digit tax increases, 25% in Armidale, I believe, 53% in Cootamundra, Gundagai. Are we going to bury our heads and pretend that it's all fine and dandy in these amalgamated councils, or are we going to realise that we may get another public policy in the state, another public policy disaster, which I say are much worse than our natural disasters, admit that we've made the disaster and get someone on board that knows what they're doing to unwind the disaster and mitigate it as much as possible so that communities don't face this extra pain.
Yeah, they were mooted here in Newcastle and the Hunter region, so we've dodged a bullet, you reckon?
You dodged a cannonball, mate.
Professor Joseph Drew, nice to talk to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. See ya.